Hello, everybody. My name is Joshua Peskay, and today we're going to be talking about file sharing and backup for your organization. So I hope that's the topic everybody's looking forward to talking about today. All right. So first of all, a little bit about me. My name is Joshua Peskay. I am a trainer an expert trainer for Idealware, of course, and I'm also the co-founder and vice president of RoundTable Technology. RoundTable provides technology services, strategic technology services to nonprofit organizations in New York City, and then we also have operations in Maine. And we work with over 100 different organizations, helping them with infrastructure, strategic planning, database development, application development, website, social media, pretty much everything under the umbrella of general technology. Idealware, let's see. So Idealware, if you're not already familiar with Idealware, is an organization that provides information in the form of webinars like the one you're participating in right now, and then also articles and research and reports on all sorts of areas of nonprofit software and services. So they have really a huge library of resources of training materials and research reports and articles talking about best practices in the area of fundraising, donor management, database management, social media, engagement, pretty much everything, again, under the umbrella of technology or software and services that nonprofits need to manage. So they've been doing this for over 10 years now, and they are really a fantastic, fantastic organization in terms of providing those resources. Also on the call today is Vince, and I know, Vince, if you want to give yourself an introduction.
Thanks. Yeah, pleasure to be here. I'm Vince Morris. I think I know most of y'all. I'm the director of Arkansas Legal Services Partnership and also the director of Arkansas Pro Bono Partnership. Do some consulting on the side. And it's kind of here to bring some legal aid insight, commentary, and see how it kind of relates to our work. So again, thank you for having me.
And Vince, do you want to talk just for a little bit about lawhelp.org, or do you want to wait until we get into the file sharing portion?
No, actually, it'd be great. Actually, I was going to talk about a project we have that kind of falls underneath the umbrella here, what we're talking about, file sharing. This is more content sharing. And I think some of y'all might have been on an earlier call about share law, and just trying to get some word out there for all of you content developers as well as you as the techies, and most of us use both hats, I think, and have to at least manage the content if not develop it. And what we have here is you can see share law, and you see the participating organizations right now. If you scroll down just a little bit, we got a few more in the last week. And now we are cross-platform, so we have open source sites, primarily Drupal, and then now we have three different sites sharing from lawhelp.org too. So we're encouraging whatever platform you're on, even if it's not an open source template or with LawHelp, we can get your feed. And what this does is it's kind of a window shopping situation. You can drill down and look through organizations or by topic with a national sharing matter index. And you can just pull in and look at the content that's developed across the nation, be it something like family law to Social Security. It is kind of focused on federal-based law, stuff that we can easily replicate, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And you can see what they've done, not just the text itself, but when you pull in and look at one of the sites, then you can see how it's presented on their website and kind of frames it. So you see what they've done with white space, any type of presentation, images, graphics, and things like that. So it's a great place to start, and either for full-on replication or just repurposing, or even just getting an idea when you start a project and start laying out content, things you might not have thought about. And you can see it's a wide variety. We got, let's see, Maryland to lawhelp.org, is that San Francisco, I guess we'll call it that. But you just get a good sampling, and I really promote anybody that does content work or content management, certainly content development, to just sign up, and you go to sharelaw.org, and you can sign up there. And then you don't have to share content to be a member, but it'd be great if you do. And if you want to share content, then you can just get with me or submit a feed there. if you want to grab your RSS feed and send it to me, or just get with me if you're having any issues with that, and I can walk you through it. Pretty simple process. And it's all tag-based, so the content that you decide to tag, you can just create a special tag for it, say share law. And after you get it set up, then you just add a tag to whatever content you think would be beneficial for the rest of the content developers out there, and legal aid and access to justice land and things of that nature. So I don't know how far, maybe if we had more time later, I don't want to take up too much time with that now since we're talking more general and traditional file sharing and cloud work here. But it's a great legal aid resource, so please give me a call or an email or go through the contact there. Or bookmark it definitely, sharelaw.org.
Thank you so much.
This is probably a good time to mention that all of our webinars are recorded and posted to YouTube, including that share law one that Vince and Kristen Vermeil from Atlanta hosted last week. That webinar should be up in about a week or so, where we kind of walk through the basics of how to use that site. So, and then this is being recorded. We'll be posting it afterwards on our YouTube channel.
Thank you, Brian, for mentioning that. I thought you were saying this was being recorded, so Vince, you need to tame it down there for a minute.
I think that was the subtext. All right. So the other thing I want to mention is that if you have a question at any point as we go through this session, you can either enter your question into the chat session. I'll be trying to keep an eye on that as I talk. And then you can also hit *6 on your phone and unmute yourself and then ask a question that way. So if you do have questions, those are the two ways you can kind of get them in. So we're going to start just figuring out sort of where file sharing kind of fits in and things to think about as you're doing file sharing. So essentially, file sharing, I think we all basically understand the gist of it. It's the ability to share content of one kind or another with other people who either need to view that content or collaborate with you on editing that content. And we want you to kind of think about three core things as you're looking at file sharing, which is the nature, and I would tend to say this is the most important thing when you're trying to look at file sharing, which is what is the nature of the collaboration that people need to do? Do they, need to edit files together in teams, collaborate that way? Do they have a lot of very large files that they need to use and collaborate on? Are they doing video editing from very large files or working on huge documents or huge libraries of photographs? The nature of that collaboration and something that's very relevant to this group is where does security fit in? So what kinds of documents can you collaborate on in one space, and then what kinds of documents have a whole different set of security requirements in terms of how they're going to be accessed and worked on together. Another thing to think about is where people will be working or remote team members. So, it's one thing if you really just have one office, with 10 people in it, and they come to the office, they access files on the file share, and they go home, and they really never have any need to, operate or access those files from outside. I would tend to suggest that describes almost no organization that I know of these days. Generally, the expectation from any organization is that staff can access the files and the documents that they have permissions to anywhere where they're connected to the internet. That's not always true, and it's certainly not true of all organizations that they have that functionality, but I think that's the functionality that most organizations are looking to get and certainly are aspiring to. And then the other thing to think about is backing up information, and we'll talk about that at the end. But thinking about what are the requirements in terms of retention of this data, both for functional purposes within your organization, which is the first consideration, but then there's also maybe legal requirements in terms of retention. The documents have to be kept for a certain time period, a certain number of versions. What are the requirements for that backup, and how can you support that backup as you go forward and as your data winds up in lots of different places? So how does file sharing fit in? Well, we're looking at kind of a very basic network diagram. So if we start from the far right where you see the planet, that's the internet. And as we come inside the rectangle, you see the little, the bricks with the fire. That's your firewall, which is what's protecting you from the internet and setting up rules. And then, we come inside, and most organizations, at least in some capacity, as you go down and a little bit to the left from the firewall and see that kind of big tower filing cabinet looking thing, that's a file server. So most organizations still have the bulk of their files sitting on a file server somewhere in their office, and most of their file sharing is done from that file server, and most of the files are backed up from that file server. Not all organizations are even that far along. There are still organizations out there that just have documents on individual computers and share them by email or by putting them on USB drives or CDs. But most organizations are at least to the point now where they have some kind of file server in their office, and the files are being distributed out that way. And so what we're going to look at today is, obviously we're looking at file sharing. The key considerations, which we've talked about a little bit, backup considerations, and at the end we'll put that all together. So why file sharing? Why not just email files back and forth, or use USB keys, or other ways of just sending files to each other? In the old days, for those of you who've been in the computer world for more than, I'll say, 15 or 20 years, I might remember a term called sneakernet, which was a way of, instead of having a network that you shared files on, you would put files on a floppy disk and walk them to another computer, and that was how files got around. So we called that a sneakernet as a replacement for a network. You can certainly email a file to somebody, and that's still something that's very commonly done. But one of the problems with doing that, or doing USB or other kinds of things, is that obviously creating multiple versions of files, multiple copies of files that are not necessarily related to each other in any way. There's no what are called access controls when you move files around that way. So if I, have a file that's on a server and is protected by certain permissions, and then I take that file and put it on a USB drive and give that to somebody, that USB drive has none of those access controls. Unless someone's done a fair amount of work to, encrypt the file or protect it in some way. The file's now just sitting on this USB key that anybody can take and have access to the files. And in fact, that or some scenario like that is how historically a lot of sensitive information has wound up getting breached. If you kind of read stories about a lot of the major security breaches that have happened, oftentimes it's someone who has a fairly high level of security clearance in an organization not following a good procedure, and they have secured files, confidential files sitting on their laptop unencrypted or sitting on a USB key unencrypted, and someone just stole it from them or accessed it and copied it. And so that's a real danger when you have files that are moving around in that fashion. So at this day and age, where we're at kind of technologically now, most organizations that I'm working with are kind of in between a traditional file server or a group of file servers that are running on their network and cloud-based file sharing. And most organizations are at this point operating kind of in both spaces. They still have a traditional file server. They're still managing the bulk of their file sharing that way, but they're adding cloud services to enable some collaboration, enable remote workers. One of the case studies that we're looking at is doing this exactly. And essentially adding a kind of cloud piece for the data that has a real high collaborative need, that there's a lot of people that need to access that data from different places. So if you're debating sort of, what are the differences in terms of, a server-based file sharing, cloud-based file sharing. So in a server, you generally are going to have all your, important company files in one place and often on one machine. So that has good elements and bad elements in terms of managing it, but that's generally true. So if you have a terabyte of data, you have a server that has a terabyte of storage, that server contains all of your files, you permission it appropriately, you back it up appropriately, and that's relatively straightforward to manage. If you need more space, you just purchase more space, you add another drive to the server, or add another file server, or add network attached storage or NAS, or some capacity to have additional space. You are responsible for the security of that data, and you're going to be the sole person who's responsible for the security of that. You are responsible for the upkeep of the server, backing up the server, all of those things. Is enough tech savvy required, in terms of you have to have someone who can at least, unbox and put a server operating system onto the machine, set up file shares, and share those things out. And depending on, what things that you set up in your organization, generally there's limited access remotely. There are tools that you can use, like WebDAV, that will allow people to access files remotely from outside the office on a file server. But in most organizations that we see, they're operating this way. They don't have remote access to those files unless they're using like remote desktop control software like LogMeIn or GoToMyPC, in which people connect to their computer that they use at the office from home. And then once they're there, they can access whatever that computer can access. But if you don't have that, like just going from a web browser, you generally can't get to the files that are on your server. And certainly there's no kind of syncing to allow those files to sync to computers in different places. So comparing that with cloud, cloud can certainly be a lot less expensive. So if you're a nonprofit organization with a 501c3, then you're eligible for Google Apps for Nonprofits, and that comes with 30 gigs of storage free per person, which is a pretty good chunk of storage. And adding additional storage is very inexpensive. So you can, get up to a terabyte of storage with Google under a given account and still be well under $100 a month for that access. So it's can definitely be less expensive. Other cloud systems can be more expensive than that. Cloud-based files, Dropbox, Box.net, Google Drive, SkyDrive, all of these are things I'm guessing that you've heard of and maybe have used in one capacity or another. They're pretty easy to access. So if you have files that are stored in Dropbox, you go to Dropbox.com, you log in with the username and password, and you see all the folders and files that you have access to. You can download them and work on them or view them online. Same with Google Drive. The other thing that is different, another element that's different about cloud-based storage is what's called syncing. And this is an important thing to consider when you're looking at, especially when you're looking at replacing a file server with cloud-based file storage. So if I have, let's say, 500 gigabytes of data that my organization has that is part of all of our shared infrastructure that people need to access. If I want to put that all in the cloud and make it available to all of my staff, then I have a little bit of a problem in that I'm going to wind up potentially needing 500 gigabytes of free space on every staff person's computer and an enormous amount of internet bandwidth, at the very least, when I start setting up this cloud-based storage. And here's why. Most of the cloud-based systems will install a client application on your computer that syncs the cloud files locally to a folder on your computer. So if you're using something like Google Drive, you'll install the Google Drive application for a Mac or for a PC. And once you've installed that, you'll log in with whatever account you use for Google Drive. And once you're logged in, it'll ask you which of the files you want to sync to your local computer. And if you choose all of them, then you need enough storage space to store all of those files on your local computer. And that's the area where cloud-based file sharing as a replacement for a traditional file server gets problematic for a lot of organizations because the storage requirements on the individual computers in order to sync all that data becomes a real issue. And so the way that we've been working with organizations is we've been doing this for, much more intensely in the last year or two as organizations have been looking to move to cloud-based file sharing, is asking organizations to kind of reorganize their data and organize it in ways so that people can select which folders they will need to synchronize and which folders they won't, and also divide their data into that which is needs to be part of the kind of active collaboration that everybody's working on, and then which data is essentially archive information that people do need to access and need to have access to, but may not need frequently and may not need remotely. Because if you can reduce the amount of data that you need to have available to everybody through a cloud-based system, it makes it much, much easier to implement that cloud-based file sharing system for your organization if you can reduce that storage need. So that was a fairly long-winded explanation of that, but I just wanted to get through that. And the other thing about, obviously, with cloud-based file sharing is that you definitely need a very, very reliable internet connection. Now, this comes up in cloud technology with everything when you talk about migrating to the cloud. And my general response when people ask if I need like a better internet connection than I have now in order to move to the cloud is that you probably, if you don't have a good internet connection now, if it's not very fast or not very reliable, you probably need a better internet connection anyway. Because most organizations, whether they're very cloud-based or not, are very dependent on internet for their daily work, for their communications, for their ability to connect to resources that they need. Adding cloud, in particular adding cloud-based file sharing, does increase your bandwidth requirements, but not significantly. And again, if your bandwidth is so poor that you couldn't support a cloud-based file system, then your bandwidth is probably needs to be improved anyway.
Great, and a lot of that also depends on what you're putting in the cloud. So, for example, Daniel Ettinger and I here both do a lot of video work at Northwest Justice Project, myself for LSNTAP and him for our YouTube channel. That requirement on our internet is significantly higher, and under our previous internet hosting, we could see an impact on our video conference system whenever we were uploading or downloading to online sites. That's very different than if you're just using cloud storage for email and text messages.
Absolutely. And another thing is, and it might be worth taking just a couple of minutes to talk about it, is understanding downstream and upstream bandwidth and how those impact different things that people do on a network. Thank you for that point, by the way, Brian. So downstream bandwidth is essentially how fast you get things from the internet. And so when you look at an internet service contract, you'll usually see it as expressed as a number / another number. So 5/1 or 10/2 or 3/3 or something like that. So that first number is your downstream bandwidth, and that's going to determine how fast you're able to get things from the internet. Download a video, download email, look at web pages. So when you type in www.google.com, you're essentially asking, for that web page to be delivered to you or downloaded to you. So that's going to affect your how fast you're able to browse the internet, download those things. Upstream speed has traditionally been less important because people's interaction with the internet has been mostly to get information from it. But as people are, Web 2.0, so to speak, social media, YouTube, photo sharing, video sharing, cloud-based applications, all of these much more interactive uses of the internet put a much greater load on the upstream side of your connection. So the upstream side is how fast you're going to be able to deliver information to the internet. And so that's when you're uploading something to YouTube or uploading photos to a Flickr page or editing your website through a content management system or using a cloud-based application like Salesforce. All of those kinds of uses are going to be require good upstream bandwidth. So if you have a very low bandwidth connection now, or upstream bandwidth, then moving to cloud-based file sharing means anytime you put a large file in your Google Drive, it's going to put a load on your network for a substantial period of time while it tries to upload that file to the internet. A very quick way, if anyone wants to know, and you can type it, I'll type it into the chat for everybody. There's all kinds of bandwidth tests out there, but the most common one that I use is the one I'll put in right now, which is just a Speakeasy speed test. And that'll tell you very quickly what your bandwidth is, at least right now.
Great. And there are definitely ways on the network side to segregate your traffic and have some dedicated traffic towards or some dedicated portion of your internet access dedicated to particular applications or use sources. We're looking at that with our move from our current phone system to a voice over IP and a unified communication system, so that we don't necessarily have all traffic competing on a single outgoing tube, so that one area doesn't take up all of that bandwidth inadvertently.
Yeah, and there are other things you can do. So if you're running voice over your internet connection using voice over IP, then it's essentially a requirement to have quality of service, or what people refer to as QoS, which allows you to prioritize your voice traffic over data so that someone uploading a large video doesn't cause people on a conference call to either get dropped or suddenly have poor voice connection. But you can get more creative than that if you want to prioritize certain people or certain types of data traffic over other types. So you can prioritize, for instance, mail traffic over data traffic, so that if people are uploading videos, that's going to take a backseat to the email going in and out in your office. So if you don't have enough bandwidth to kind of easily handle all the needs that you have, then you may want to engage with the network engineer to help shape your traffic so that it's prioritized in a way that makes the most sense for your organization. Okay, so we're going to talk just a little bit about Google Drive, just because there's a couple of misconceptions about it, and I know there's a fair number of Google people in this group. So one thing that I've discovered as I work with a lot of organizations, I've been doing a lot of Google Apps implementations over the last year, and I've discovered that a lot of people still believe that if you want to have information stored in Google Drive, it means you have to use Google Docs. You're limited to the kinds of documents, to working within the Google Docs editor or the Google Spreadsheets editor, and that you can't store like a Microsoft Word file or a Microsoft Excel file within Google Drive. So I just want to state here that that's completely false. You can store any kind of file that you want within Google Drive, and you can store files up to a gigabit of size within Google Drive. And essentially, it'll just show you them as different icons. And I don't know if there's a good example right there, but as you browse through, you can actually see one icon will be a Google document, meaning it's Google's Word editor, and it's that type of document. And then another document might be a Microsoft Word document that you could view in your web browser using Google. But if you wanted to edit, you would actually need Microsoft Word enabled to edit it. And when you're using the Google Drive application that I talked about earlier that kind of syncs things to your computer, then you can open and edit all of these files just from your Google Drive folder, just like you would a network file share or any other kind of document. So, just the basic point is that you can keep any kind of file you want in Google Drive, and that's also true at this point of pretty much all the other cloud-based systems, that they allow you to store any type of file from any type of system. The catch, because you can access that from any computer, as long as you have the appropriate credentials, is that you may not be able to edit those files unless you have the application that is required to edit them. So you can keep raw Photoshop, like PSD files there, but you're not going to be able to do anything with those files other than view them unless you have Photoshop or an application capable of editing CSV files on the computer that you're working from. All right, and so that's another consideration. So there are other cloud. Go ahead, Brian.
One other quick thing to mention, I'll put a link in here, but there is actually a Google group for individuals in legal services that are using Google Apps, and it is not that active of a discussion group, but it does at least give you the contact information of about another 25 or so legal services groups that are using Google as an option. So.
One of our case studies is using Google as an option as well, and so we'll get to them when we get to those case studies a little later on. So other cloud sharing options, SkyDrive, which gives you up to 7 gigs with each individual account with Office 365. Most people have heard of Dropbox, which gives you 2 gigs for free, and then an individual account, 50 gigs, I think, for $10 a month, and 100 gigs for $20 a month. And then there are corporate plans for Dropbox as well. As you get into corporate file sharing, where you're looking to, have more than 5 or 6 people collaborate within a shared, document storage space, you're probably going to be looking beyond Dropbox and into services like Box.net or Eggnite.com or Sooner are all viable options. I'll dump these all into the chat window just in case people want to look at them. And they all have kind of different pricing structures. They all have different options available for nonprofits, and they're all very rapidly changing. This is an incredibly competitive space right now. So all of these different providers, including Google, including Microsoft, are constantly changing the feature sets that they offer. So it's something that if you're kind of in the decision-making area of your organization with IT support, it's something you kind of want to keep a pretty close eye on because stuff changes all the time. As one example, Google just very recently, it used to be up until about 3 weeks ago that if you wanted to share a document that you kept in your Google Drive with someone else, they had to have a Gmail account of some kind because they would have to log in order to access the file that you'd shared with them. They just changed that 3 weeks ago, so now you can share with any email address, and that email address will be able to just click on the link and view your file. So that's a big change, and those kinds of changes are happening all the time. Sometimes you have very specific file types that you want to do that don't make sense to be in this kind of file sharing. So if one of the needs that you have, and this gets back to the very first slide where we talked about consider like what kind of collaboration you're trying to do. If the primary thing you're trying to collaborate on is basically, you have 1,000 videos and you want to have those available to people to view, remotely, then, it doesn't make sense to be putting those in Google Drive and having people have to download, monstrous videos in order to watch them on their own computers. You would use YouTube. You would set up a YouTube channel and start publishing videos to that channel and distributing them out that way. People can then subscribe to that channel if they want to view new videos as they come online. You can set up some branding so that it matches with your organization. Similarly, if you were doing a project like that where you were dealing with hundreds or thousands of photographs and you wanted to be able to organize them into different projects, have people comment on them, be able to view them in galleries and share them with other people, then again, it wouldn't make any sense for you to have all of those files in a traditional file structure when there's Flickr just sitting out there as an entire platform that's been developed specifically to do all of that functionality, to give you all of that kind of photo sharing and setting up galleries kind of views. So you want to look through like what is the kind of collaboration we're looking to do, and there's not going to be one answer for all the different needs that you have. You're definitely going to be putting together kind of different answers for different things.
Joshua, if I can interrupt real quick, this is Vince.
Please. Yeah.
Just do another shout out for ShareLaw. We have a sister site that's ShareLaw Video, and that's being run right now by Atlanta Legal Aid, I believe. And they, it's not necessarily a file sharing place insofar as storing things, but it's different in share law in that you do actually upload the video files, and then if you're a member, you can go view these different segments. And it's really great because you can grab little pieces of video footage that isn't necessarily organizational specific. So I'll make a lot of YouTube videos for our Legal2 channel and other type of media promotions. So it's great to be able to go snag some professional footage as well as some not so professional. I upload stuff there too, so you can tell my stuff. But great the way you can piece together if you just need a court scene or something like that. It's an easy upload. It takes a minute if you want to share, and it's an easy download too. So again, that's Share Law Video. Definitely check that out if you're dealing with any type of video content creation. Or
yeah, and the technology behind that site is a Drupal front end and then Amazon S3 on the back end to store all of the videos. So it's a cloud-based, very inexpensive hosting solution through Amazon.
Great. Thank you, guys. Very good stuff. So some people have needs that go beyond simple file sharing and get into, project management needs. And so there's getting to be a kind of blurrier and blurrier line between kind of project management and document management and just general collaborative workspaces. And that all these things are kind of combining together to some degree. But just so that we all have a kind of common terminology about how you would use these different things. So a project management tool gives people a kind of web-based space to store documents that are connected to a specific project, and then have project team members that can view. You can go to that page or that site and see sort of what documents have been uploaded or edited recently, what events are coming up in that project, what deliverables are due, or what tasks are coming up for you or for other people. So that's kind of a different sort of collaboration than simply, having a space to share files with people. But there are a couple of different things there. One of the case studies we'll be looking at today is using Central Desktop, which is pictured here in the bottom. And then one of the most common tools that's used for project management is Basecamp. These do different things. Basecamp is generally more used by website and software developers because they have tools in them that allow you to track time, which may also be relevant, obviously, for legal services, but then also track things like bugs or open tickets or different things related to the project that you're working on. So those are different features connected to project management as kind of differentiated from this document or file sharing. And then, kind of further blurring the line in there, you have Microsoft SharePoint, and then within Google, you have Google Sites. And so these are kind of very open, collaborative workspaces that you can kind of set up to do what you want. So you can absolutely set up SharePoint or a Google site to be a project management tool. They allow you to build very simple websites, add calendars to them, add tasks to them, add team members that have access to a specific site. They give you a lot of options for notifications. So if a new document gets uploaded or edited, people can be notified that a change has been made. If a task is coming up for an individual, they can get notifications. You can view project status on the calendars. So these are things that are free for most of you in the sense that if you're using Office 365 or Google Apps for Nonprofits, you would have access to all this stuff free. Central Desktop and Basecamp would both be project management tools that out of the box have more of that functionality right there for you, but again would have an ongoing cost. Just skip the page here. Yep. Okay. So remote desktop access and virtual private network. So I talked about remote desktop a little bit earlier. This is another way and a very common way that organizations provide access to their applications and to their files from outside the office. So the difference between these two things, so a VPN, or virtual private network, is a fairly secure way of connecting an endpoint, and that generally means a computer that's not in your office or outside of your office, with the network where all the information is. So if you're working from home on your laptop and your organization has set up a VPN for you, then you'll have instructions on your home computer on how to connect to your organization's VPN. You'll follow those instructions. You'll be prompted undoubtedly for a username and a password in order to connect. You'll need the virtual private network software in order to create this secured link between your home and your internet connection and your office and its internet connection. And that's where the virtual private network comes in. You're connecting over the public internet to your office, but you're encrypting that connection. So you've created, in effect, a virtual private network between your home and your office. And now your office computer, or your home computer, I'm sorry, now is effectively functioning like a computer in the office, with the exception that the speed is obviously not going to be as good. So that's one way that people provide access to things. And then once you're connected to the virtual private network, you can open up your email client and connect all your emails. You can open up a file browser and browse to whatever files are on the network that you have access to. If there are applications, you can access those as well, and your application client can connect to the database that it needs in order to run. And that's been probably and still is the most prevalent way that people work remotely, particularly in larger corporations, because it's very secure, and it allows those remote workers to connect. The downside to it is that it's fairly complex to set up and manage, and the performance of it is not very good, even sometimes over fast internet connections, because the encryption causes a kind of slowdown in the traffic. So it's becoming less popular, especially with the advent of cloud technology. Remote desktops, which is more what small and medium-sized businesses tend to use because of the simpler setup, are things like Log Me In, Go to My PC, or simple Windows Remote Desktop Connection, or RDC, which allows you to connect to another, your office computer. And then once you're connected to it, it's kind of like you're sitting at your office computer. So if I install Log Me In on my computer in the office, it's a free software to download and install. Then once that's installed and running, as long as my office computer is powered on and connected to the internet, anywhere that I have internet access in a web browser, I can log into Log Me In, put in my proper credentials, my username and my password, and now I can view my office computer on my home computer or whatever remote computer that I'm sitting at. And now I can do anything that I could do if I was sitting in the office, except walk up and go get a cup of coffee from the office kitchen. And even printing on most of these systems, you can send a print job from your office computer to the local printer that you have at home. You can transfer files from your office computer to your computer at home. So that is a nice, simple way of providing remote access. However, a lot of people don't find the interface quite as good. Depending on the software you're using, it can be a little bit slow, a little bit clunky. The colors, may not come across because it might be limited to 16 or 256 colors on the remote connection. And from a security perspective, it can be a little bit concerning to network administrators because all of those computers can now be accessed remotely by anyone who has credentials for them. So that adds a concern. So those are some other options as well for kind of providing remote access. And again, from a security perspective, those things can be made secure, and VPN join is very secure, but it's yeah, I would say it takes a little more work to make remote desktop as secure as other methods of providing that kind of collaboration. All right, I'm going to stop just for a little bit and see if anyone has any questions at this point before we jump into document management. See if anyone's got anything in the chat window. Brian's reminded everybody, if you want to unmute, *6 to go ahead and unmute. All right, I'm going to continue on. So document management, how does it differentiated from the other systems that we use? Increasingly, there is less and less differentiation between a document management system and what most of the cloud-based file systems now provide in terms of functionality. So in Google Drive or in Dropbox or in Sooner, any of the products I've talked about, you're going to be able to track updates to a document. So there are different levels of notifications, but in Google, for instance, you can absolutely subscribe to document changes. So if you have a particular spreadsheet or a particular Google document and you want to know anytime someone updates it, you can subscribe to changes for that document and be notified anytime the document is changed, who changed it, what change they made. All previous versions are stored. Most of the document systems that we're talking about in terms of cloud-based have a default 6-month retention policy, and then you can pay or build in additional retention if you need that. And so what that means, if you have a 6-month retention, is first that you're going to have revisions for a document going back as far as 6 months. Second, you have restore capacity for those documents going back as far as 6 months. So if I created a document today and then it got changed 10 times between now and 6 months from now, I would be able to go back in 6 months and review all the changes back to today. If I created the file today and then deleted it, and 6 months from now decided I really wanted that file back, I would still be able to restore it. Now, if I go to 6 months and 1 day, unless I've done something additional, I will no longer be able to restore that file. If 6 months go by and I've never requested the file, never tried to restore it, at the end of that retention period, I'll no longer be able to restore that file. And then same thing with revisions going back over in 6 months. So that's one of the areas you want to pay attention to as you're using these systems, is what retention you require for your organization. The ability to check out and or lock files to prevent simultaneous editing. Some of the systems support that pretty well, some of them don't. If that is a critical function for you, you definitely are going to want to look into that and verify whether or not you can do it. In my experience of these systems, Sooner is the only one that does this reliably to prevent simultaneous editing of documents. It actually enables you to lock a document, keep people from working on it. People can see who has the document locked, send them a message, things like that. Google Drive, Dropbox, Box.net, Ignite, all do not do as well in my experience of using those products. I welcome anybody else's feedback who's worked with other products and found the document locking to work well, but that's what I've found to this point. And I make no money from Sooner in terms of reselling or anything like that, but just what I found. So in terms of being able to rigorously manage and search documents, again, all of, when you have a cloud-based system like Dropbox or like Google Drive, the search functionality is obviously exceptional. The one thing that a document management can give you that some of these other ones are still adding is the ability to tag documents. But they're all kind of adding that as well, so you can tag documents in any way you want. Google uses a system obviously called Labels that allows you to apply labels to different things and then connect them in that fashion. So there's, again, the basic thing I'm trying to get from all of this is that increasingly, while there are still document management systems out there that you can purchase or use, For most organizations that I've talked to or worked with, what's built into the cloud-based systems is sufficient to what they need. And I'm definitely going to stop here for a second and see if either Brian or Vince wants to weigh in there in terms of any particular legal perspective about document management.
This isn't Vince, but I want to kind of or this is Vince. I'm sorry, this isn't Brian.
That's okay.
Wow, what a day. I have a month-and-a-half-year-old baby, by the way, so sleep deprivation. Blame it on.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you very much. But just as a note to the legal aid community, with document management systems popping up, as well as just storage systems like Box and all that, I kind of got my feathers ruffled a little bit when one of the organizations we support in the statewide started using that more than our statewide website, which when we first, for those long-timers out there, we first got grants for statewide websites, and it was really kind of a document management system in a way for everyone that kind of predated that. And so I developed and used it as such, but there's no way, unless that's your full-time job, you can keep up with these great resources out there. And so when one of the organizations started using, it was just a Box, I think, or Dropbox, so it wasn't even a DMS, but it was like, why aren't you doing this on the website? And so all these features that Josh was talking about, like track document updates, I'm not aware of any statewide website out there that has that type of functionality. I just kind of had to let it go and incorporate it still as best I could into the statewide website, but realized that there was going to be multiple points. So one big thing I'm looking at, and I've learned a lot from Joshua from our earlier meetings and as well as from this presentation, is syncing and making sure that the document management systems either have the same functionality as the storage, so you don't have multiple places, like say you store it in Dropbox and then you're using a document management system, and then you're tracking it in a project management system, particularly the interplay between project management systems and document management systems. So there's not multiple nodes of content, and I know a lot of y'all out there juggle thousands of pieces of content like I do. So anyway, I was just bringing that into play. I don't know if anyone else out there has had that experience as a statewide website manager.
Yeah, this is this actually reminds me of something that came up, Vince, in the security workshop, and Brian will remember this term, but it's called shadow IT, and I think it's totally relevant to what you just talked about. And this is kind of an interesting trend that's really only been true probably in the last 5 or 6 years, as cloud technology and consumer technology has gotten so advanced that people have the ability to kind of set up their own methods of sharing information and of accessing information. And so what shadow IT refers to is when people within an organization basically create their own infrastructure in which to share information that is completely outside of organizational control. And people do that not because they're trying to, or at least I hope, not because they're trying to skirt, policies, but because they just need the functionality, and their IT department either has failed to give it to them or has failed to communicate to them effectively, that they have it and how to use it. And it puts a really kind of new burden on IT departments to not only provide all the functionality that their staff are saying they need, but to communicate to them, that technology is available, how to use it, and then, make sure there are policies in place to, quote unquote, encourage them to stay within the bounds of the infrastructure that you're offering them. Because if you fail to do that, people will just work around IT, and then you can have and we talked about this in the security workshop, you can have all the wonderful security that you want, but if your staff just work around it by creating their own Dropbox accounts and sharing information that way, then, you really haven't accomplished, much in the way of security. So it's kind of a nice thing in a way, I think, in the sense that it really is pushing IT departments to deliver more and more functionality to staff because they have to in order to kind of keep them operating inside the bounds of the organization. And so that sounds like a little bit like what you were talking about there, Vince. The website didn't provide the functionality people wanted, so they just find their own way.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I'll just skip over the failure part that you mentioned, but no, there's no success like failure, and failure is no success at all, right? Gillen quote, my new child's middle name is Gillen, by the way. But that's absolutely right, and it's a good thing, ultimately, as long as you can get a grip on it, you know, and figure out what everybody's doing and communicate it and make sure you include it in policies. But it's great, I think, that they're stepping up and that you have autonomy up there right now. And I think it's almost more of a personal autonomy, and they're not waiting on me. Not that they have to wait that long, but it's great that they're seeking technological tools. So that's what I've encouraged all along. I just fell behind a little bit.
Right. You definitely need to have a system in place so that people feel like they're working collaboratively with IT and not working against your IT department. On the document management system piece, though, one thing that a lot of organizations seem not to have considered yet is what is your document destruction policy with regards to those external systems. If you have a cloud-based case management system, or you have documents sitting around in Dropbox or on Google, the default there is to keep those things forever. And legal aid organizations are really good at having a physical paper destruction system, usually based on their own state law rules on how long they have to keep documents and when they can get rid of them. But unfortunately, that hasn't transferred over to these online systems, and there needs to be a concerted effort to make sure that those documents are being purged from those online systems, or they'll be around forever.
Great point. Thank you so much, Brian. I'm writing down a note to add that to this presentation going forward as the opposite of the retention policy, and that's exactly where I should have talked about it too. Is in the flip side to the retention policy is, and I have had this come up with other groups, is what about your destruction policy? How do you make sure that or the data that's stored and potentially this touches on Vince's point as well, as the document. As data gets spread out into different places, how can you make sure you're destroying it in all of those places as well? And so, again, the more you can provide a coherent system that people will work within so that you know where all the data is and can manage it all, the better chance you give yourself at managing that all effectively.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Ron. If I could just speak to it for a minute. And going back to that example of one organization using Dropbox, so they had all their helpline letters in there, which I normally edit and upkeep and then upload to the website, and then they download to their My Documents and keep forever, right? I can change it on the website, but not so much on their My Documents. So that's one instance where the cloud really helped, because they would sync, it would overwrite, and everything would be great. But we still are battling that, even within that, when people open up a file, keep it, modify it, change it, save it on their hard drive. I just got back from a pro bono meeting with our energy company here. They're wanting to do pro bono, and the head of the legal department wants us to print out all our fact sheets so they can have it in a book. So it's still something we battle, but one thing that I think the cloud actually helps with. But great point, Brian.
And this slide also talks about how a lot of organizations, the one I'm looking at, the key policies in mind, that naming conventions for files. So you have version 1, version 2, version with people's initials on it, and all that stuff. In certain cloud-based file sharing systems, you don't have to worry about that anymore, because the file sharing system kind of manages that all for you. Because you can always review a previous version, you can see what edits different people made. So having these different copies of files and different versions of things becomes less of a need and can kind of simplify your document creation policy. So that's another area where this stuff can really help you. But again, depending on what systems you're in, you do want to make sure that the policies are clear to everybody, that people are being onboarded properly when they come into your organization, so they understand where files should be stored, how they should be named, what they should be doing and not doing with them, and then periodically review with your staff those policies, have them sign off once a year to make sure that they've understood them. And, if they're changing or if they're significant, policies that, you don't think are being followed well, make sure there are trainings being provided to your staff so that those can be made clear. So this is one of the things we were talking about in terms of versioning policies and purging older versions. Thank you, Brian. And we're going to talk a little bit now about encrypting in the cloud. So a lot of people think if I put the stuff in the cloud, then obviously there's security concerns there, there's access there, how can I keep Google from accessing my data? So you can encrypt data before it goes into the cloud, and then no one is going to be able to get it out of that encryption system unless they have the encryption software that you use to encrypt it and the appropriate credentials that are needed in order to decrypt it. And so there are a few different products out there that do this kind of stuff. SyncDocs is being used by one of the legal services groups, and we'll look at them when we get to the case studies. Box Crypto is another one that's very popular for use with Google Drive. And then TrueCrypt is probably one of the most popular, just sort of basic, free encryption software to encrypt data that's on your laptop or on your computer or on your file server or, again, in the cloud. And so what encryption software does, in a nutshell, is you install the software on your computer, you create an encrypted space in which you can then put files. And that space is only accessible when you use the encryption software like TrueCrypt to open up that encrypted storage, and then you'll be able to view the documents that are stored within that. So you could have a library of 100 files that look within Google Drive like one file. It would just be one TrueCrypt file. If you wanted to view the documents that are in that file, you go to open up that TrueCrypt file. It essentially mounts on your computer as like a drive, so all of a sudden you have like a G drive that is that TrueCrypt space, and then you see all the files that are in that. And the only way you'll be able to do that is if you have the software and the appropriate credentials to access that encrypted space. And so that gives you the ability to, take advantage of some of the cloud in terms of the availability, but have that extra layer and a very significant layer of security of having that data encrypted. You can have an encrypted workspace within your cloud storage that way. Just want to repeat very quickly here, Brian, because I think it was you who made this point about the ACLU, that they, even with encryption like this, that they prefer to keep data on their own servers for the single reason that if a subpoena comes in for that data, they want that subpoena to come into them. And I think this is a reasonable point, a reasonable place to make that point to anybody. It is something to be aware of. If you have data that's stored within a cloud provider like Google or like Dropbox, and the U.S. government wanted access to that data, their subpoena would go to Dropbox and may have a gag order saying that Dropbox isn't allowed to tell you that the government has asked for your data. And for that reason, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, the ACLU keeps all their files on their own servers that they manage so that any subpoena for their information would come directly to them and they would be aware of it. So if anyone, on this session has a similar concern like that, that should kind of factor into your thinking.
Yeah, you basically got that correct, and that was last time I talked with ACLU of Washington. But the anybody who is concerned about that should definitely take that into consideration.
Okay, so what are your requirements? Is your collaboration ongoing, imperative processes? Are you connecting outside your office? How much space do you need? What kinds of files do you need? You want to be thinking about, all of these things as you're looking at it. It's almost gotten to the point where looking at your files is almost like, building an application. You look at first you look at what is your requirement set, and then start evaluating products to see which ones meet the requirement set that you have put forth. And that's a good thing. There's a lot of functionality out there. In the cloud, and this is a really important piece, there's one very big difference about how cloud files are permissioned, which is that on a traditional file server where an administrator sets up folders and then permissions them to certain people, and then staff that are accessing those file shares just access them based on whether they have permissions to them or not. In the cloud, you often have the ability to change permissions yourself. So in Google, for example, and this is true of Dropbox as well, the default when you share a folder with somebody and give them edit permissions to that folder is that they then can add other people to share that folder with or share that document with. So you've effectively given them not only access to edit and view the folder and or file that you're sharing with them, but you've also given them the ability to share it with other people, effectively changing the access controls on that. So as you use cloud-based file sharing systems, if that's something that you have a concern about, you have to really look at the policies and how that stuff is set up and be including that in your policy development and in your administration of those cloud systems to make sure that people don't have the ability to share things if that's not an option you want them to have. So we just have a picture of it here so you can see what it looks like. So editors are allowed to add people and change the permissions and the owner. And then the other thing that's different about cloud file sharing is that people can create a folder or a document that they own that is kind of outside of the control of the administrator. And they then manage the permissions themselves. And so that's another thing that you can restrict through policies and is different from cloud-based file sharing service to cloud-based file. So Dropbox does it one way, Google does it another way, Box.net does it another way. But you again want to understand whether in a cloud-based file sharing system people are creating documents that essentially no one sees but them. And that becomes especially relevant, if you look at purging and or data retention. So if I have, if I'm using all Google Apps, for instance, it's something that's changed is we have a lot of organizations working completely out of Google Apps. When someone leaves, normally you would go and delete their user account. But in Google Apps, you first have to see if there are any documents that are owned by that user account and transfer ownership of those documents to the administrator or to an appropriate staff person so that you don't wind up deleting access to all of those documents when you delete the user. And that's not something that would typically be true in a normal kind of traditional file sharing network. So that's an important thing for people to understand. Let's see how we're doing on time. Moving along. Okay. So, talking about backup solutions. So, there's a couple of things to think about in terms of backups, which is, what is a backup solution? What are you trying to accomplish? So, first and foremost, in a backup solution, you're trying to create a copy of the data so that if the primary source of the data loses the data, you have another copy of it somewhere that you can go fall back on, so to speak. And so in a traditional file sharing network where you have the data on a single file server, this backup is very, very critical because there are so many ways that you can lose the data from that one server. Someone could delete a file off the server, someone could get malware and the data can become encrypted or get deleted. A hard drive can fail on the server. All kinds of things can happen to render that data missing. So backups are very, very critical. When you have data in the cloud, backups are essentially included in that cloud arrangement. So if you're putting things in Google Drive, Google is backing that data up for you. They have their own backups in place. They have that retention policy that they stand by. So it is a fair question to ask whether you even need a supplemental backup to data that's stored in the cloud to begin with. And that's kind of something that I generally suggest organizations kind of review and think about and decide what they're comfortable with themselves. There are cloud backup options out there, and there are things you can do, and we'll go look at some of them. But it is definitely not as critical to have a backup policy for data that is in the cloud as a starting point. It is absolutely critical to have a backup system in place for data that's on a traditional file server or not being stored in the cloud, stored on a single computer or a single server or a single group of servers. All right, so we talked about that. Why backups? Protect against deletion of files. So if you're weighing the options, so if you're backing up on your own network, all right, then you keep the data on site or you physically off-site the data by carrying tapes or most likely in these days USB drives. The backups can be shared internally very easily. You can seems like a different thing. You only need to purchase whatever storage you need for those backups, so the cost generally is not terribly high. You have to run the backup software yourself. So you have to run backup software that's going to identify whatever data you need and move it. And again, if you're backing up just to a USB drive, and I see this a lot in organizations where they have a file server, and then next to the file server they have a USB drive. They're running backups to that USB drive, and that's really all that's happening. So that's fine if they had a hard drive failure or data got deleted. But if they had a fire or a flood or a theft or anything that damaged the server, the likelihood that it's also going to damage the drive that the backups are on is very high. So off-siting data is very, very important. Cloud-based backups can be less expensive than managing your own backup solution. You don't have any of the kind of versioning compatibility issues with backups. You can access it anywhere, which is a huge advantage. So when Hurricane Sandy blew through New York and we had a lot of organizations that got thrown offline, if they were backing up, again, just to like USB drives or tapes, they might have had, the tape sitting in their apartment or the USB drive sitting in their apartment, but they didn't have the backup software or the server required to access it. So that data was effectively useless to them. If their data was in a cloud-based solution like Carbonite or Mozy or Amazon S3, then all they had to do was go and access it and restore it to where they needed, and they were able to get those files. Obviously, you need good internet to back up to the cloud, and the space issue you're going to pay, but increasingly very, very little. Amazon S3 is down to, is it down to 10 cents a gigabyte now, Brian, or is it still at 15, or do you know? I don't know off the top of my head. It's either 10 cents a gigabyte or 15 cents a gigabyte for Amazon S3 storage. So it's increasingly pretty inexpensive to keep data in the cloud. So here's a bunch of different cloud-based backup solutions. There's Carbonite, there's Mozy. The one that I have been liking the most lately is CrashPlan. And I don't know if anyone has heard of that or is using that, but I'll briefly talk about why I like CrashPlan so much. One is that it's a cloud-based solution, so while you download software that you run on the machines that you want to back up, the information about your backups is all stored in the cloud. You can set up your own cloud-based backup solution if you have multiple sites where you have data and internet connections, or if you have a partner organization that is willing to work with you. And what I mean by that is that if Brian and I both decided we wanted to back up our critical data to each other's offices, I can set up a CrashPlan account for myself, and Brian can set up a CrashPlan account for himself. We each attach whatever storage we need. So I put a terabyte of storage on my network, and I make that available to him. He puts a terabyte of storage on his network and makes it available to me. I now, have this terabyte of storage that he's given me on his network that I can direct my crash plan backups to. Even though my data is going through the cloud and onto his storage, it's encrypted by my crash plan account. So he still can't access my data, even though it's physically sitting, perhaps on a USB drive right next to him. And then the same thing for his data in my office. And all of that functionality that I've just described is available free. So CrashPlan gives you all of that level of functionality, and the only thing that they charge you for is if you also want to store your data in their cloud. And even then, they're absolutely competitive in terms of price with Mozy and Carbonite and so forth. So it's a really nice solution. I've been using it for a couple of years now for a lot of different organizations, and I have nothing bad to say about them as a provider. And it's a very kind of creative, interesting solution that I had actually been wondering why it didn't exist 10 years ago, because it makes so much sense as a backup methodology. Another thing I'll say, or actually we're going to get to this next. So there are also services that will back up your, go ahead.
In using one of these, let's take CrashPlan. If my server goes down in my office here, and I've got an off-site backup, how long does it take to actually get that back up and running?
Well, it depends on how much data and how much bandwidth you have. But with any cloud-based backup solution, you'll usually have an option for a local backup as well. So let's say that you had a terabyte of data that you were wanting to back up, and you wanted to have an offsite option using My Office. So you would have a terabyte of storage that you would assign to yourself on your own network. So for instance, you would get a terabyte USB drive that you would attach to your own network. And that's where your first backup would go. And that would be the first thing you would look to restore from if you had any kind of failure. But the offsite backup, which is, for a true disaster, like you had a fire that took out both your server and your local backup, or something happened so that your local backup didn't work, you could then now go to the cloud backup. And how long it's going to take you to get a terabyte of data from my network is going to depend, or from, CrashPlan's cloud, is going to depend on, how much data you have and the internet speed that you have to download that data. So, it could be several hours, it could be several days. Usually if it's going to be more than several days, there's an option to have them put all the data on a disk and just ship you the disk overnight. But that's basically what you're looking at.
So with Crash Planner, what you basically have is just a giant file that has all of the data. And that's going to be very different than if I have a site in the other side of the state and I have a site here, and I've got servers on both that back up, and I can just switch over to that other server.
Yeah, that's a different, because that's what you're talking about then is kind of like replication and high availability. So backup services should not be confused with continuity or high availability. So you can't just fail over to it and have all your files immediately available. You're going to have to go through some restore process that's going to take a period of minutes if it's a single file, hours if it's a large group of files, or days potentially if it's literally having to rebuild an entire file server from a backup. Having high availability is a totally separate situation and would involve setting up multiple file servers, having the data and the permissions for that data replicated, and then having things like heartbeats, to monitor whether the server's up and available, what the failover rules are going to be. Microsoft Windows has something built into that, which is DFS, or directory file structure, that they will allow you to set up multiple file servers and replicate data. But that's a fairly involved thing, and again, a lot of the cloud services make that totally unnecessary to do if you can use them for that file sharing. Did that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, because we definitely have some considerations around kind of a second site backup, especially when using multiple sites for file sharing between multiple offices. So that's a different type of solution than this. So.
Yeah, and you just want to think that through, and like when organizations are thinking about, I always say there's two different terms that get thrown around synonymously, but to me they're far from synonymous. So the first term is disaster recovery, and the second term is business continuity. And people throw those around like they're the same thing, and to me they're totally different. Disaster recovery is, to me, if a giant hurricane comes through and literally destroys our entire office, will we have our data protected? So will we eventually be able to, get to all of the data that was in our office before the hurricane, wiped it off the map? So, and that may be a period of days, it may be a period of weeks, but data won't be lost is the main part of disaster recovery. And understanding how long it's going to take you to recover to a point of functionality from different types of events that would happen to you. Going from the very simple of a simple file being deleted to the very massive of a hurricane wiping out your office. Business continuity is, will we be able to continue working, and what functions will we still have in the event that the hurricane wipes our office off the map, or our power goes out, or our data is lost, or there's different kinds of things. And so those are very different solutions. So it sounds like you're talking about, Brian, is more business continuity.
Definitely.
Which is how can we continue working in those things. And that's, in a nutshell, one of many reasons why cloud computing is so popular and so prevalent, because it provides, obviously, for a variety of reasons, a much greater business continuity than, traditional network infrastructure.
One other thing I wanted to point out to people, as I know we're coming up upon the end of the time here, is that I put a link in the chat to the SurveyMonkey account survey for this webinar. We'd love to have your feedback if there's areas that we didn't cover that you were really kind of expecting to see, or if you have any ideas for improvements, please let us know. We read through all of those responses.
Thanks, Brian. And how are we on time? I'm sorry, I lost track. Oh, we are getting tight. Okay, so let me jump through just 2 quick points on backup. So here are some options if you do have cloud-based data that you do think you would like to back up. Here's some of the options that are out there. This is a very, very new space in terms of the market. So there's not a lot of solutions that are very mature, and it really depends on what you're looking for. But here are some options. And then another option that you can think about, for instance, if you were using, let's say, Dropbox to keep 100 gigabytes of important data for your organization, is that if the data is stored in its original source in the cloud, then backing it up to your network, essentially the reverse of what a cloud backup would be, right? So if you have data that's on your network that you would back up to, let's say, Carbonite and put in the cloud so that you have a backup in the cloud, if the data is originating in the cloud, then it is a perfectly reasonable thing to back up that data to your network. And keep a copy of it there, and that effectively, gives it a backup that's outside of the system in which the data originates. And that's, again, the really key point. The other thing, and this is the part that is, there's no easy way to do it, it's just work, but is to identify where all of the information in your organization is that should be included in your backups, and figuring out where it is and how it's going to be backed up, and then reviewing that at a minimum annually, and depending on the nature of your organization, perhaps more frequently than that. So that's another thing to think about. So I'm going to cruise through the backups because we actually kind of talked about all this, and we're going to look at the case studies because I really wanted to get through those. So we have Law New York that has 7 offices throughout New York State. And they are using Google Drive for a specific set of data that they really want to collaborate on. And then they're using SyncDocs to encrypt that information. So again, there's only 10 gigs of only sensitive and important files, but it is apparently proven difficult for some of the staff members to use. they are considering implementing an inter-office VPN, but the cost was too high to be practical. So at the moment, they're using Google Drive with SyncDocs in order to provide this information to everybody remotely. And this gets into one of the kind of concepts that we talked about in the security workshops, which is that there's an inherent tension between convenience and security. So each organization has to make its own decisions about the balance there, and it can be different based on the kinds of information that you're dealing with within your organization. So case files within a legal services, are different than marketing materials in terms of their security. Marketing materials that are designed to be public, that are all getting released publicly, that are being published on your website and handed out in written brochures, obviously have a different profile than a client's case file. So you have to think about the nature of the information and what security is appropriate for it, understanding that, if you encrypt data and force people to use an encryption program to access it, you're adding an additional kind of burden to your staff in order to access that information. You need to make sure that, you're justified in doing that. The Montana Legal Services Organization has 3 offices throughout Montana. They each have a Linux file server that's set up, but they don't connect with each other. And they're using one of the things we talked about, which is central desktop for most of their file sharing and project management. They use a service called SOS, Online Backup, for their servers and computers in the office. And that's another thing that you can think about with backups. If you do think that you have lawyers or staff that are walking around with sensitive information on their computers, on the desktop of their computers, in the My Documents folders of their computers, then you may want to implement a backup policy for those individual computers. There are lots of programs that you can install on individual computers to back those up to a cloud-based service. And that's really important for mobile devices like laptops that all sorts of bad things can happen to them in terms of theft and damage. And I think we're pretty much out of time. We'll kind of leave it on this slide and think about what you're doing now and what you would do in the future, and I will stop and open for any additional questions that people have. Thanks to Brian and Vince for all of your great comments and commentary on this. Please do fill out the survey, and I will hang on for a couple of minutes in case anyone has questions.
Yeah, thank you for putting this on, and thank you everybody for showing up. This is the last of our webinar series for the officially sponsored ones from LSNTAP and our partners. There may be 1 or 2 more webinars, as a few organizations have contacted me about possibly distributing some information before the end of the year. Those will all be posted, if we do have any, on the lsntap.org website under trainings and on the LS Tech listserv. So we'll get that information out there.